What is the worst thing a coworker has done and not been sacked for? I had a colleague grab our boss by the throat and drag him into the meeting room, where he punched him twice. The boss had asked how his work was going, but in a really annoying manner. We all sided with the colleague as the boss was truly annoying, but still didn't expect the boss to be moved on and the colleague to be back at work the next day. Story 2. The irony that the worst behavior I've seen has usually been from the people in charge, who aren't exactly going to sack themselves. Our old MD had clear favorites and used to go and sit on her mate's desk cross-legged, feet up and everything, and just loudly chat all afternoon right in the middle of the office, in front of everyone. Then she'd have the gall to get very aggressive about targets and pissed with the rest of us for not getting enough done, claiming we're all distracting each other. Story 3. Refused to teach a woman her job because he doesn't want a ducking woman in his office. The guy literally bullied her out of his office and she ended up getting sacked for it. She came in to drop the keys off to me with a big smile on her face though. They paid her over a year's wage to not take them to court, and she ended up finding a better job. Story 4. NHS doctor inviting a vulnerable adolescent to his house for massage therapy. He was not a qualified massage therapist. They both said nothing bad occurred, and the investigation had to take that at face value, apparently. On the inappropriateness of it, the investigation concluded the doctor was just naive and let him off with only a "don't do that again." He went straight back to work on the adolescent unit. Everyone on the unit was absolutely fuming. Several refused to work with him. I left, but he remained long enough for it to well on the way to blowing over for him. Story 5. I worked with someone who used to take sick leave all the time for stress. Fair enough, I left the country for a bit, and when I came back, one of my mates was going to college, and he told me this person was on his college course, like a business course of some kind. I checked back with my old work colleagues, and they were off on long-term sick with stress. They were getting paid full sick leave while attending college 5 days a week. Anyway, got back to them in my old workplace, and they didn't do anything. Took the person back after they finished their course, and they promptly handed in their notice. Story 6. A lad I used to work with used to somewhat regularly go on benders, wouldn't show up for several days' work, and when he did, he'd be on a massive come-down, completely unable to work. In my last month or so, he ended up becoming a supervisor. Story 7. We had a very important server go down, and the backups for it were on the server. I expected heads to roll, but the two people deemed responsible for it said technically it wasn't in their job description, so they weren't responsible for it as the task had never formally been assigned. I think they got verbal warnings, and that was it. Story 8. I worked in HR. Girl claimed she had been violently ill with craps and a bug and was off for just over a week. That's fine. We had a very good sickness absence policy, and within reason everything was always paid well, and we didn't ask for DRS notes. There was a good level of trust. However, posting pictures of herself and her mate drinking cocktails on a beach and clubbing to her Facebook where her manager's a FB friend did not go down well. She resigned before she was disciplined. She would have only got a warning as well, fool. Story 9. I went on a staff trip where the operations manager got so drunk he wandered around the hotel in his underwear, got locked out of his room, pissed on a fire escape, and then had to creep down to reception to get a key. Story 10. Intern borrowed the MDS car to go on an off-site job. MD found a thing in the ashtray. MD's son identified it as a half-smoked. Guy kept his job and was promised a company car if he could try to get to work on time each day and smoke a bit less. Other example at a different company was a colleague who phoned in sick and 3 hours later posted a picture of the keys for the new car he'd just picked up on Facebook. It was hastily deleted when someone called him out on it. Kept his job despite that and having a poor attendance record. Story 11. One lady I worked with in an office used to get more obviously drunk throughout the day from the gin she'd keep in her bag and take to the toilet, and I mean really obviously drunk, then drive home drunk at the end of the day. She did this for a year or so and nothing happened. I hope she's okay. Story 12. I was interviewing someone and an ex-colleague called to warn me not to hire him. Apparently, he had a history of getting a job that disappearing for weeks at a time with no excuse. It generally took employers 2 years to fire him. He'd move on to another job. I stopped the interview process. Story 13. I used to work for a tree surgery business. Tree surgeons are hard to find, and there were many tales of wrongdoing going basically unpunished. Funniest was star worker peeing in someone's back garden, unknowingly in full view of their young daughter, looking out of their bedroom window. Story 14. This dirty piece of crap spat in a colleague's face. This guy who spat was old and regularly coughed up blood and stuff. Absolutely disgusting. He was in his 60s and spat in the face of a 20-something-year-old who didn't really know how to respond. I heard and saw the whole thing. It got reported, and the old guy said he was eating and food accidentally came out. When I heard this, I went to one of my bosses and told him that isn't what happened, and I even heard the guy clear his throat before spitting. He never got fired. In fact, he got promoted about a year later, LMAO. I won't say exactly where I worked, but this was a government department, a place which looks after its own. Personally, if it happened to me, I'm not stopping until that guy is fired and I'm getting him arrested. Story 15. During the first COVID lockdown, when we literally couldn't go anywhere, a lad went AWOL for about 2 weeks. Wasn't logging into Teams, wasn't available for any jobs, wasn't answering emails or his phone, and hadn't let anyone know he was sick to explain the absence either. In the end, they had to call his dad to make sure he was all right, and he'd apparently just been sat in his bedroom at his parents' house the whole time saying he was working. They furloughed him for a couple of months while they decided what to do. Then restrictions eased, so they called him and me back into the office so I could keep an eye on him. His flat was only 10 minutes walk from the office, and he still managed to be regularly late. The quality of his work was also awful, and he was really slow to complete it. They gave him a last chance disciplinary. Things didn't improve, but he miraculously kept his job. I left for another role and found out he'd been promoted not long after, despite still being absolutely crap. A mate that still worked there told me he had another last chance disciplinary for the exact same issues and still kept his job despite zero improvements. Meanwhile, another lad who was far less crap got sacked immediately when they rang him during lockdown, and he was out collecting his nan's Tesco shop. Presumably, he'd have been fine if he hadn't answered the phone. Story 16. We had a lad who would disappear for hours and hours. He only got sacked when we stopped working too. Told the manager he gets paid for duck all. Why can't we too? It took 2 days for them to find him at work to fire him. Ridiculous company. Story 17. Call center night shift. Becky saying, I'm popping to the all-night supermarket right next to our building to buy some painkillers. Ann says I have some here. Becky ignores them. Doesn't ask anyone, doesn't tell any manager, just leave. There's about 10 of us on shift. It's quiet. I didn't know this part until I get a phone call on the recorded customer line from Becky. She's been in a car accident and her car is in a ditch. She needs to let Big B know, the boss. Turns out she hadn't walked to Tesco. She had gone to her car, smoked and driven to a garage. Not even the one right next to us, a part of the supermarket. 5 minutes away, but a fox ran out on her coming back, or so she said, and she crashed her car into a ditch. Third time, riding off a car. Second time was right outside the hospital and broke both her ankles while driving Mom's car as hers was written off. The fallout was underwhelming. Nothing much. Maybe she got a warning. She'd had a lot of sick time. A few weeks later, she called in saying she was already late as she'd driven past a gas leak and it had made her really sick. When she finally got to work, they let her go and rest. They went to check on her and she wasn't on the breakout area. She wasn't even asleep under a table in the ground floor stuff restaurant, a neither spot she would hide in. She wasn't in the building. 6 a.m. rolls around. I happen to look up and spot her coming in heading to the toilets. There are 2 entrances and she picked the one in full view. I told the boss she was back. She still didn't get sacked. She was, however, allowed to resign. Story 18. Taken more than half their working days off on sick leave over a 5-year period and actual miscalculate the maximum allowed, totally breaching the sick policy. Still didn't get the boot. This person also always took all compassionate leave days too. They also took around 3 months to retrain whenever they did turn in, as they'd always be off for the maximum full pay period of 6 months. Utter waste of oxygen. Story 19. Co-worker working as an analyst years ago. Unable to complete basic duties of the job. Lied about completing work for clients. Untested work knowingly sent to customers. Consistently late with the same excuse of public transport, but never got up earlier. The team would have to pick up their work as they were at risk of the project failing due to this person's laziness. When the individual was confronted about this behavior, they would always claim that everyone else hadn't given them what they needed. They would also accuse managers of bullying anytime they had picked up on this trend of incomplete work. I believe they are still there at the company, and who knows how you can have a job for so long when you have no idea how to do it. Story 20. 10 years ago, I worked for a business where the owner used company funds to pay for his landscaping and electric gate at his own house. The latter was apparently necessary as he had confidential material at home. Had a 55th birthday party attended by 130 guests in the guise of a networking event, so the business paid for it. Multiple bits and pieces from iPad to phones bought by the company for personal use, so tasked people in the finance department to do his own personal accounting. Sacked? Nope. The parent company bought his shares and he ran off into the sunset. Story 21. A temp randomly deciding to tell a full team meeting, including the unit head, why she preferred sleeping with black guys. Nothing was done, I think partly because none of us could believe it was happening. Story 22. Over a period of 4-ish years, almost single-handedly got the company banned from multiple pubs, restaurants on Christmas, summer parties, for varying drunken antics, from starting fights to inappropriate behavior with waitresses, to getting employees drunk, to dumping an entire roast dinner and a pint of beer in a charity donation bucket. Was generally an unpleasant person to deal with, whether he was drunk or sober. Honestly. Also made another employee cry on multiple occasions. Never got fired. Eventually quit. 2 years later, and the boss just gave him his job back. Story 23. A customer who recently had his car in for a full service called screaming that he just flew through a junction because his brakes stopped working. We sent a tech out to inspect the car and found that the tech who had carried out the service had left the bleed nipple on one, the calipers loose, and his spanner was still attached to it. He didn't get sacked, and it was covered up by management. Story 24. This predated my time there by quite a bit, but the story has gone down in company history. During the 80s, when everyone used to drink and drive, a field-based salesman got absolutely crap-housed at a company function and decided to drive home. He was swerving all over the road, so rightly got pulled over. He proceeded to punch the police officer and be further arrested for assault. Instead of getting fired, he was promoted and given an office-based job since he obviously lost his driving license. Story 25. A bit of info on the process at the time, as it's necessary for this story. We're a digital marketing agency, and my team worked with the web development. At the time this happened, the process from getting the design to showing the client was meant to take about 40 hours to complete over the span of about a month. Within that time, the developer was to make a website that looked like the design, put all the copy for the website onto it, and hand off to the manager. The manager would then look at the site, note down any amends which needed making to the site, and then the dev would action them before handing to the boss for a final review. And if the boss had any amends, the dev would then do those amends before the client call. We hired this person, let's call him Bob, about 3 months prior to this incident. Bob was a little slower than expected when he started, builds taking closer to 50 than 40 hours to complete. No problem. About a month before this incident, myself and our manager took him to one side and explained to him about his code not being up to scratch, as it was very poor quality. The day of the incident is burned into my memory. The boss and I are the early starters of the company. When in the office, I was starting at 7 a.m., now earlier, and he got in around the same sort of time, but a little earlier than me that day. I walk in and the boss is stunned, silent. He calls me over to his computer and says, "Can you fix this?" He explains that Bob had spent over 200 hours working on this website. He was given a deadline to show the client, as the client wanted to see it that week, a week prior. Bob wasn't able to send the website to the manager for his review, so there were no amends. Not a problem. We sometimes have situations where clients spring deadlines on us, and we have to crap a "it's still a work in progress" type speech when showing what we have done so far. But it always has the boss go through it before the call, just so he knows what isn't right, and can request anything which is majorly be wrong, be fixed before he shows it to the client. So I'm looking at the website that Bob had developed, and I know it was wrong. This was a website I had made the design for. It looked nothing like the design. Everything was wrong. The only thing which was the same was the colors used. Fonts, wrong. Images, wrong. Layout, wrong. Style, wrong. The boss asked me if I could at the very least get the homepage looking like the design in the 3.5 hours before the meeting with the client. Luckily, all the content for the page was already added. And that is, for me, the slowest bit. But it was not a fun morning. I don't know what repercussions Bob got for this, but what I do know is that Bob resigned a few months after this incident and to work with a service our company uses for most websites, and that service had some issues with their code for a few months not long after. Coincidence? But he was never fired, and he 100% should have been. He regularly spent 60+ hours on website projects, never improved his coding standard, and his websites had to go through multiple rounds of reviews internally before we could show the client the site was for. Story 26. Worked for a bank around 20 years ago. Coworker had numerous complaints about data protection breaches and one night left £17,000 in cash under his desk overnight. The cleaner found it and left it on the manager's desk with a note. They tried saying it was me, but all my cash was recorded in the safe, so that didn't hold long. They still didn't fire him. He left of his own accord a year later, after he got the manager pregnant and decided he didn't want to be a father. That pretty much summed up why his duck-ups were getting covered up all the time. Story 27. One of my new graduate team members at the office less than a week got drunk at a party to celebrate our company's acquisition of another company. It was at the other company's office, and I arrived late to find this bloke wasted. There were spirits and no food, and he tells me it's fine because when he gets drunk, he just gets sleepy. I told him to go to the toilet, being like, "You are about to be sick, mate." He didn't believe me, but did go there. Next thing I know, he is chundering everywhere. All toilets and sinks are now blocked with sick, and he eventually was placed in the shower where he continues to projectile vomit. Eventually, I managed to take him home in a taxi across the city and then spent 90 minutes getting home. Acquisition company were pissed, but he didn't get fired because the execs conceded that they shouldn't have provided limitless spirits with no food, and there may have been some goading by the colleagues to do shots. We now forever have the 2 wine or beer tickets rule for future parties. As the office was small, it was the receptionist's job to clean the toilets. After a little hinting, the guy got a huge bunch of flowers and chocolates for the receptionist to apologize. Story 28. There was a guy I managed who used to swear under his breath constantly and never pay any attention to things I'd ask him to do that would make his job easier. But he got a free pass because the owners thought that he was on the spectrum. He got progressively worse, and he would make nasty comments to a lot of the female employees, one of which he used to share a train with. She told me that he'd told her, "You aren't worth abuse." I told the owners, but they said it was a he said/she said situation and did nothing. I left before him. I can't believe I tolerated working with him for so many years. Story 29. I had a coworker who simply refused to do most of his work. He would avoid doing the paperwork because he was bored by it. He made that immensely obvious. But he also refused to do any of the physical work because he considered himself to be a classical guitarist. No idea. And had to look after his nails. I asked him why he didn't use a plectrum, but his only answer was that if he broke the nails on his right hand, he wouldn't be able to play, and his life would be meaningless. He basically sat there all day doing nothing whatsoever. A boring life, if you ask me. He told me he was a feminist, repeatedly and completely unsolicited, yet he had an expectation that I would wait on him, bringing him his coffee, washing up his crockery, and generally cleaning and tidying up after him. I never had a male colleague in my entire career who expected to be waited on the way this feminist did. You would think that after months of my refusing to make his coffee, I did clean up after him because we needed a clear work environment and there was no other way, he would have accepted that. But no, it made him fly into a rage, throwing things around and shrieking. He was so victimized by me, a kind of mummy, not bringing him his coffee. Okay, confession here. I absolutely enjoyed that. I tried complaining to management, but as all complaints had to go through our line manager, and 7 or 8 year older lady than him, who he was living with as boyfriend, girlfriend, and who obviously utterly adored him. Even I had to admit he was very pretty, in a young Russell Brand type of way, and the way the manager gazed at him was nauseating. Apparently, since leaving music college, he had never worked and never wanted to. He only got that job because his girlfriend had arranged it all for him. As you can imagine, my complaints about having to do the work for the pair of us were ignored. I learned to just get on with it. Things were brought to a head when I was hauled up for a disciplinary hearing because I was accused of having used offensive language towards him. I was surprised to hear that. Actually, I had always been icily polite. It didn't go quite the way the couple had wanted. Instead of the disciplinary being held just by her, for some reason, possibly office gossip somewhere else in the building, a panel of several managers, and not just her, was brought in. When asked by the panel what offensive language I had used, the beauteous boy said, "She said I didn't care about our customers." I consider that to be offensive language because I was very hurt. The panel asked me why I had said it, and I said, I told him that he didn't care about the customers because he threw all the filing away during the week I was on holiday. All our department's customer records have now gone. This was at a time when records were kept on paper. I asked why he had thrown everything away, and he told me that he had no intention of doing the paperwork when I was on holiday, and he was going to permanently ensure that was never going to happen. The understandably shocked-looking panel asked the little prince if this was true, and with admirable insouciance, he shrugged and admitted it. There was an audible gasp. His girlfriend looked so horrified. Presumably, she had coached him to whatever he did, not to admit to that, but he just couldn't be bothered to lie. He was like a spoiled, sulky little boy who really didn't care about anything. The head of the panel then asked why I hadn't reported his behavior, which permanently damaged the organization quite severely. I replied that I'd complained about him numerous times in the past. I briefly outlined why, to his girlfriend, who was our boss, and that the only result was that I was being disciplined. There was complete silence. I think there must have been a suspicion that something was going on. No manager, indeed no one, was supposed to work with their romantic partner. And here it was, out in the open. Our manager went beetroot red. The other managers openly glared at her. It was a delicious moment. The head of the panel turned to the beautiful boy and me and said, "Okay, right, you two can get back to work." That was the end of the disciplinary hearing, and I heard no more about it. So did the pair get sacked? What do you think? However, what happened to the beauty was actually more satisfying. He was moved into an office of 4 extremely powerful, middle-aged women who didn't care how pretty he was and wouldn't let him get away with anything. He left, literally in tears, within the week. Legend has it that during that last week, you could hear his indignant, petulant girlie shrieking several offices away. But his complaints were to no avail. He didn't have his girlfriend as his boss anymore. It turned out he did care about that. Story 30. My ex worked in the medical school at Edinburgh University back in the 1980s. Two lecturers hated one another, and it escalated to them fighting with scalpels in a corridor. While the students watched, they were stopped before any actual wounding. These weren't young hotheads, middle-aged men. Story 31. For context, I used to work at a factory that made body butters. These are typically made in 4-ton vats and need to be kept at a high temperature to remain fluid to be able to be pumped out. One of the guys I worked with was making this particular product this day and was trying to connect the pump to the vat to pump out the product as it was ready. He noticed the valve had a bit of solid product blocking the valve. He proceeded to unblock the valve with a rod, but forgot to turn off the mixing blades. The blades then smashed the rod into a 90-degree angle, which was then unable to pull back out, and hot product was now gushing out in huge amounts. Said worker was unable to put the cap back on or a pipe to stop the flow. All 4 tons emptied out onto the entire production floor, and the into drains meant for water runoff for area cleaning, which proceeded to go solid. Keeping in mind, this is now in the entire draining system, completely solid. Took weeks to clean and 80,000 pounds in damages. Still kept their job though. Story 32. Had a guy who was in his 40s, big, fat, smelly guy who was just awful. I sat on a desk with 3 other girls, and he'd come stand by our desk and tell us about all the SEC parties he'd been to and how he used to work as a bus driver, and he'd let homeless women sleep on his bus in return for a BJ and just all these ducking, disgusting stories. We complained so much to managers and HR, and they all thought it was so funny. He was obsessed with me because I played World of Warcraft. He'd email me, and if I didn't reply in 2 minutes, he'd come over and force me to stop working to listen to him. He used to order this massive breakfast every day and then wander around the office with a piece of bacon in his bare hands, just offering it round to everyone. He did get fired in the end, but only because he sent an email to the CEO with a picture of a woman tied up in a basement. Bonus! After he left, I got taken in my HR to receive a written warning for receiving too much harassment. They placed a pile of about 300 emails down and were like, "We're paying you to work, not sit around and chat." And I went, literally every single one of these was sent to me. I haven't replied to a single one, and they didn't give a crap. No wonder that job made me bald. Story 33. Someone I know works in a school, and the cleaner, for some unknown reason, decanted bleach into small plastic cups and left them on the table. When the children came in after break, it looked like a glass of lemon squash, and a child drank an entire cup of bleach. They had to go to hospital and have their stomach pumped. Luckily, the parent was very understanding and didn't try to sue the school or do anything litigious. Miraculously, the child made a full recovery and was okay, but the cleaner and the teacher were traumatized, and it still gets regularly brought up in staff meetings as what was the most memorable/worst moment in the school's history. No one was sacked, but there was a lot more staff training on chemicals after. Story 34. We had a director whose wife threw him out for shagging escorts. He ended up living in his office and was only found out because a cleaner caught him duck an escort over his desk. He was then caught drunk driving. As he was so valuable to the company, they rented him a flat next to the office. At a Christmas do, he groped a waitress, still never sacked. Story 35. She dropped a cigarette whilst having it in the back and it landed near the main power supply. Caught fire and caused a 3-hour power cut, leading to 20,000 worth of stock being binned as we couldn't keep it cold. A few weeks before, they didn't turn up to open the shop at 6 a.m. as they got too drunk the night before, and we had staff waiting outside till 9 a.m. until the next manger came in. The days of Tesco aren't missed. Story 36. Used to have a supervisor who arranged dates with men during her lunch hour. These usually ended with her having to pick up her son from nursery as he was sick. He was a very sickly child. Story 37. Worked with a guy who came in after breaking his 3 years of sobriety the night before with a liter of gin. He was in the office still steaming drunk and then popped substances and shared them around. Story 38. Me and my colleague got caught throwing knives at the ceiling in canteen as they had the old styrofoam things. Manager walked in, saw a knife hanging from the roof. Grow up. Walked out, never mentioned it again. Story 39. I had a manager who was obsessed with Michael Jackson. He was late to work one day because he was on hold to get tickets to the show at the O2 and spent the entire day just waiting to get through doing no other work. He got demoted down to team leader. Then MJ died and this guy had a full-on breakdown. Something pinged in his mind. He started making all these grand plans for his future with no backup, making odd comments, either not being at work on time or when he wouldn't be doing anything, and generally on a very slippery slope. He just didn't show up for work one day, and we'd all assumed he'd been sacked. He arrived back 3 months later like a different person. demoted back down to my level, and working with me on my new role. He was eerily calm and relaxed, like he was being highly medicated. Then he just left one day and never came back. I would have been sacked for not turning up to work the first time. Hope he's okay. Story 40. Many years ago, we had one girl who only worked mornings. At lunchtime, she'd close down her line and desk and disappear off. I thought nothing of this. Who doesn't do this when their shift finishes? Except she didn't go home. She went upstairs and had set up shop providing executive relief for any bloke with 20 pounds to spare. This went on for months. Literally everyone knew, including the other women on the phone. No one said a ducking thing in complaint. To be fair, the place was a crap hole, which would have sacked anyone that even looked like a problem as soon as possible. So complaining would probably have got her booted and yourself booted within minutes of each other. And if you worked there, you really ducking needed a job. It all came to a head, pun intended, when she started offering more than sex. Given that almost everyone was duck someone else at the office, when somebody eventually caught the clap, it spread like wildfire. Did they all stop ducking and have that come to moment? Did management put condom machines in the toilets? Yep, I left just after they put the condom machines in because that's just too ducking skanky. Story 41. We had a whole team of people, like your guy, who had all been working in the same team for around 20 years. They were all playing the system, had a locked folder on the local server that they thought no one could access. A guy looked into it one day and found they had a duplicate of the holiday tracker where they pre-booked sickness. No one got in trouble, despite their manager also being on it. A couple of them just booked the same days as annual leave instead because they had already paid for the flights or whatever. One went around complaining to whoever would listen after that it was unfair to stop it, as they had been doing it for years and were entitled to the sick leave. Story 42. An old sales manager at my first job when I was an apprentice got caught bending the sale assistant over in his office one morning by the managing director. She ended up leaving shortly after, and about a year later, he got a nice promotion. Story 43. Hold a knife up to a work experience because she made a joke he took offense to. Worst place I've ever worked. Only lasted a few months myself. Story 44. At the staff Christmas party, many moons ago, everyone was tipsy as you'd expect. Bloke A, a really masculine man's man type, got drunk and cornered shy, effeminate, openly gay bloke B, pinned him against the wall, fondled his crotch and asked him if he fancied him. Both parties had taken the next day off, then a weekend kicked in, but come Monday, neither of them were to be seen. Bloke A didn't get sacked, but that's because he resigned once he sobered up and realized how ducked up his behavior was. Bloke B, who was much loved by almost everyone, resigned too as he couldn't face going back in. He asked that the police not be involved, so the company respected his request. Story 45. Had a manager who bullied a couple of people into leaving. She also did the same to me. I reported her and she's still there. I left. I'm happier now I left. But she drove me to death ideation and she's there still. She has a brain tumor and she's refusing surgery and now she's going blind. She'll be let go soon. I just hope she doesn't bully more people. Story 46. The company I worked at used to rent an entire building made up of 3 floors. We only had enough staff to occupy the first 2 floors, so the top floor was always empty and no one ever ventured up there except. Or so we thought. 2 coworkers, both married and not to each other, went to the top floor toilet one day, one room which contained one loo, and were getting it on, when an electrician had been called round to do some rewiring and one of the maintenance boxes is in that toilet. So the electrician knocks on the door and the woman comes out, pretending to have just finished using the loo, and then the electrician goes in and sees the room is empty, as you would expect. When he opens up the maintenance cupboard in the bathroom, he finds the other guy crouched hiding. Then he says to the electrician that he was simply lost and runs out of the room. The story quickly spreads around the office and becomes a hot topic of conversation for some time and still is retold at work outings. That same year at the company awards, the guy won a trophy for worst at hide and seek and got up on stage in front of 400 people to accept it. Everyone was laughing, even the company directors. The worst thing is, the 2 people caught were senior management. I didn't stay at that company for very long after that. Story 47. An old account manager once set the entire data set. Names, addresses, job titles, telephone numbers, job titles, location history, expected locations for the next 30 days, of one major law firm to another major law firm. The guy who received it just replied, "Thank you for your previous email." Upon receipt, it's been immediately deleted. Our MD caught wind of it and made a joke about the guy being an idiot. Also saw a manager take a young female member of staff to an awards due on the other side of the country. He got pissed, tried to get her pissed, made awful jokes and made up of himself in front of industry insiders, tried to hit on the member of staff and apparently got upset when his advances were rebuffed. I begged her to report it to HR, but she wouldn't, as it would cause a fuss, and no one would believe her. Story 48. an operations meeting with senior managers and a bunch of sales guys. One of the sales guys was doing a presentation and asked for any questions, etc. Time went on, but they forgot to stop sharing their screen. They began to send messages on Teams saying that they're tired of being there and sick of it. They don't want to be there. Some other bad words, etc. One of the senior managers was speaking and said, "Colleague's name, you're still sharing your screen, and we have seen what you've said. If you don't want to be here, I don't want to be here either." The rest of the staff then proceeded to leave. That colleague is still there, absolutely useless also. They will get a task within 1 minute of the email being sent to them. They'll forward it to me saying they don't know the answer, like they didn't even try searching the wiki. I point them in the direction to the page with the exact info they need. They respond with, "It's too much to read. Can you take the key bits out for the response?" No, I cannot. Lazy sod. Story 49. A member of my team had been signed off on sickness absence due to stress and anxiety. I informed my own manager on a confidential basis. Later that day, my manager was going around the office talking to other people, the absentee's colleagues, about the person who was signed off and why. I spoke to my manager privately to say, she can't do that, and it's confidential, but she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. I reported it to her own manager, and nothing happened. Eventually, she did get binned, but only after a catalog of other misdemeanors. Story 50. The sales rep who brought her laptop in it wasn't running right. Easy enough fix. She needed a new motherboard, and it would be quicker to transfer her data onto new one rather than wait for a part. She seemed to have a lot of data for a sales rep, and the IT tech had a mooch around, and there was hundreds of videos of her noshing what turned out to be her customers. She wasn't fussy. Men, women, salad dodgers, old folks, she noshed the lot. I attended the MGT meeting to discuss what should be done. HR lady was very cross and suggested that she should be fired. Sales director pointed out that she was the highest billing rep and she should stay. I tried not to laugh when HR lady replied, "That's because she noshes all of our customers." Upshot was sales 1 HR 0. She kept her job, but advised to keep her amateur filming activities limited to her own devices. Story 51. I worked in Travelodge. The new assistant manager noticed a discrepancy with the number of people with breakfast vouchers versus the takings. It was happening when the manager was on. We watched some security footage. Whenever he was on and was given cash, he just pocketed it. Even looked at the camera when doing it. Didn't even get disciplined, as they didn't have a replacement. Story 52. Guy hated me because I started at the company in the position he wanted but didn't get. Constant snide comments when we were alone or passed in the corridor. Undermining, stealing my ideas. You get the picture. One day he made a remark on the wrong day, and my response, "Oh, duck off, Andy." He shoved me about 10 feet through a set of double doors, landing on my arse in front of the director's office, in front of 2 witnesses, one in the corridor and one in the office. Absolutely no warning, no sanction, nothing. Coupled with the fact the director was trying to make me do 24/7 on call with no extra money, meaning I could never have a pint. See my post history for that beauty. It took me 3 months to find a job and quit. And yes, a few days later it occurred to me I should have called the police, but hey-ho. Story 53. I work in the NHS. Coworker punched a patient in the stomach because she'd had enough of her. The patient was being restrained at the time, just got moved to another ward. Story 54. My wife's colleague hit another colleague because told him to. The victim was badly injured and left the company with financial compensation. Colleague was ordered to 1 year in psychiatric care. Then the boss announced he would be returning to resume his old position. The stabber is the boss's son, of course. Story 55. I worked with a guy years ago that got away with all kinds of stuff. Used the company car to go Kirby crawling in the red light district regularly. I caught him twice, and others had spotted him / knew about it. He left the office one Friday afternoon to go on holiday for 2 weeks. Came back with a great tan, had a fantastic holiday. Then handed in a sick note for the 2 weeks he'd been away. While his kids were at school, he used to take loads of pens, pencils, and writing pads home, including stuff from my desk. We had a small lunchtime card school going, so most of us had a bank bag of small change in desk drawers. He was stealing tiny amounts of money out of my stash. I ended up counting it every day and even hiding it. Still managed to find it and take bits. Could never categorically prove it, though. Story 56. I have staff under me now in me and partner's business that she mainly runs, who we know throw sickies at times, but honestly, we don't really care. It doesn't affect the business at all, really, or make me get paid any less. As long as they don't go over the threshold for sickness and do a good job. I'll never bring it up or call them out for it. We've already budgeted for their annual income before we hired them. I don't punish them for sick days, genuine or not. So it's a fair playing field for everyone. Had one person take advantage, and they're no longer with us. Have asked multiple times and borderline begged for the job back. But you get one chance in my day job. I work on the same basis since the company pays sick pay. I'll get involved when the company rules force me to, Otherwise, the company has already budgeted for it and everyone can do it if they want. So there's no discrimination. If you don't want to throw a sickie, that's up to you. Worst thing I've had a lad on site crash a telehandler into a JCB, cost the company $73,000 to fix. And the lad his job and telehandler license since he got substances tested and was positive. Story 57. Manager who assaulted a subordinate at a work party on top of being a manipulating piece of crap, generally while at work. Had a meeting about it set up with our mutual manager. He turns up with a folder of notes and evidence because he's been forewarned and gets away with it all. A couple of years later, he moves to a different place, gets caught robbing the safe to feed a gambling addiction, and ends up in prison. Ex-copper 2, story 58, at the NHS. Colleague used to take the full sick leave allowance every year. She'd spend her time off running her own business, which was openly advertised and trading online. She got called into a meeting, but nothing happened. Story 59, has a toxic personality and is a bully, causing 6 NHS members of staff to leave, despite being on a final warning for behavior, as well as having concerns raised via HR by various members of staff. A total letdown by the system, story 60. My line supervisor gave me loads of Valium. We took them together at an event we were working. I got sacked, and they didn't, story 61. My boss committed fraud and got away with it. Didn't get demoted, didn't get sacked, just got told very nicely, don't do it again. She input false details to gain credibility and originally ordered a coworker to do process, then became irritated when that coworker refused to do it because, unlike her, he didn't want to commit fraud. Absolute joke how that manager still works for us, story 62. Had a guy phone in sick, turns out he was in prison. He was sacked, but the unions got him reinstated on a technicality. Story 63. I reported a co-worked on 3 separate occasions for inappropriate dirty comments during 2.5 years. He didn't even get a talking to. In a sick turn of events, he left the company because he went to prison for 3 months for CP, story 64. Colleague locked a volunteer with learning disabilities who was scared of the dark in a small windowless scrap room as a punishment for things like choosing not to wear his glasses. After bringing up my concerns to management, I was silenced, gaslit, and pushed out to save face. Story 65. Not a workmate, but a flatmate. Get sex, his boss's wife, who also worked at the company. Boss found out and decked my mate in the middle of the office. Boss was fired on the spot for gross misconduct. Mate walked out with black eye and resigned. Boss wife also resigned. Week later, boss's boss rang my mate and offered him his job back, saying everything had blown over now. Went back like nothing had happened. Story 66. I once had a neighbor many years ago who had a job at a local car dealership. The story is that he took a colleague's car without consent and crashed it and done quite a bit of damage. He wasn't sacked. Story 67. 2 guys regularly stole stock and sold on eBay, falsifying timesheets and got caught. What do you think happened to them? Yeah, both kept their jobs and one is a damn manager now. Story 68. At a hotel I worked at years ago, we had the GM drinking wine in the office with his PA, who was also the girlfriend of the owner. The GM cheated with the owner's girlfriend in one of the hotel bedrooms. The owner dumped, but didn't fire, his girlfriend and went on to get engaged to another woman and held the engagement party in the hotel restaurant. During the party, he was served drinks by the restaurant manager, who was about to get married, but also secretly pregnant by the head chef. Story 69. I used to work in the food industry, and we had a chilled warehouse full of meat that was entirely automated with robots fetching product around. That warehouse was one of the most critical parts of the business as product went from there into packaging, then out to customers. The business took on a new person in finance who was given the order to reduce costs. She didn't believe in, you get what you pay for, and her approach was to get cheaper versions of everything she could, which was usually far worse quality. Unsurprisingly, no one liked her. One of the ways she cut costs was to cancel the very expensive service contract we had with the company that supplied and maintained the robots in this warehouse. I'm talking response times measured in hours, and she convinced the higher-ups to scrap it. Less than a fortnight later, a critical part on one of the robots failed, and there was no way to retrieve any of the product in its area. The maintenance company said that because we were no longer in contract, it would be several weeks before they were able to supply an engineer to fix it. 5 figures worth of product went out of date and had to be disposed of. She kept her job for that one somehow, but I believe was later asked to resign over something unrelated. Story 70. Bloke I worked with when we were getting our PhD fraudulently claimed research expenses for accommodation in the US, when he'd actually made some friends there who let him stay at their place for free. He was raking in 800 pounds a week for 3 months. He then altered most of his graphs in Photoshop, but still got a PhD. People wonder why I don't feel proud of getting a PhD. To be fair, he's now in a not stellar job, certainly one that doesn't require any higher education, let alone a PhD. So I guess karma got him in the end. Story 71. I was left alone on a retail shift a week before Xmas with a delivery to put away by a colleague who I knew had been out drinking and, based on previous experience, likely taking random substances as well, and who called in sick. I said nothing to our manager, but when I next saw the guy, I complained about his behavior and he abused me to the point that we had to be separated by the Garda. The company not only did nothing about it, but told me I was free to quit if I didn't want to work with him anymore. Story 72. Coworker in the late 80s crashed his van into a skip as he was drunk. He lost his license, but they kept him on. He got caught for drunk driving again a few years later. He was kept on again. He finally lost his job when he called a new manager a sniveling. I had the greatest pleasure of telling him he had lost his job and marched him off the premises. Story 73. So, there's this IT team at our local NHS trust, right? They're already run off their feet, barely keeping up with the workload. Then you've got this project manager who doesn't know the first thing about tech, but they're in a hurry and want things done ASAP. So, without even checking with the IT folks, this project manager decides to play electrician in the server room. They start messing around with wires, shoving in a random switch they found lying around, thinking they're some kind of IT expert. Well, surprise, surprise. The whole darn network crashes. And who gets the blame? Yep, you guessed it, the IT team. They get chewed out by the directors while this clueless project manager walks away scot-free. Not a care in the world. And these are the people who think that AI can replace all it. Story 74. Way back when I worked in tech support with an absolute psycho who would spend the day finding women on Plenty of Fish, he'd open with lines like, "You have a face that needs punched. I'm going to boot duck out of your mam's cat." And women would engage with him and he had a lot of sex. Sometimes when a spouse gets caught on, he'd get nervous and to release the stress, he would poo in ridiculous ways, usually in the cups from the water dispenser, and leave them on the path outside the office. Once he even done it in a biscuit tin and left it on the manager's desk. This was 14 years ago. He works there to this day. I don't know if he's still shagging and crap though. Story 75. I had a coworker who, apart from some extremely dodgy relationships to get a management position, then signed off a project without any oversight or due diligence that ended up costing $7.5 million over budget, then denied it despite their signature and sign off all over the documentation, then somehow got promoted again and did the same thing in another department. Civil service, huh? Story 76. At the school where my wife and I work, management decided to build an extension to the main building. This housed the deputy head's office. Wasn't even a much-needed classroom. Outside of this new building was a raised walkway with a railing on it. First day back, many people said, "That's an accident waiting to happen." Management dismissed the concerns and said it met health and safety standards. A few weeks later, due to a chronic shortage of staff, another thing the deputy head was responsible for, and a conversation for another day, one kid manages to climb on the railing. He spins round on it and hit his head. I don't know the outcome for the child, but the incident was covered up, and I haven't seen the kid since. The deputy head who signed off on the work and dismissed the more than a dozen cases of concern raised over it is still in his job today. Absolutely no consequences. Story 77. Software house. A colleague hard-coded a VAT rate of 17.5% in a program used by many clients because he was too lazy to code it properly using the system table. Story 78. Many years ago, I worked at McDonald's and a coworker took a crap inside the root beer. It wasn't discovered for a while. Many crap root beers were served. 30-odd years ago when this happened, the syrup for the drinks were contained in stainless steel canisters that had lids on top that were open for refilling. Nowadays, the syrup comes in plastic containers that are fitted directly into the system. Also remember the McDonald's golden straws that had cash notes inside. The staff realized that by bending the straws, you could tell if a note was inside. So in the drive-thru, the staff would test all his straws before handing them out and steal any that had a note inside. Also, one lad stole a whole box of golden straws, opened them at home, and found around 600 pounds. I think he got Story 79, 2 separate workplaces. Both has made me question how bad HR or management can truly be. Occurred in the last 3 years, and now I hate workplaces here. A MS line manager, late 30s, in our town is known to abuse her. At a party, he was literally groping and kissing who was out of her face drunk. No one could do anything or say anything for fear of losing their job. I stopped shopping in that branch as he's been there for over 5 years. Another is a girlfriend of a chef, very incompetent but very good at manipulation. She got a very talented girl fired as she wanted her position. Said girl actually got the chef his job and therefore got the GF whatever role she was offered. Still managerial, but she wanted her role. After a few weeks, we could all tell she cannot cope. Spelling and pricing mistakes on the system, wasteful orders, and final straw for me was she started screaming at me whenever she was stressed, blamed us for mistakes, and accused us of being lazy. Halfway through her yelling, I was already finished writing my resignation in my head. Maybe these people are in cahoots with senior management, that's why they don't get sacked. Story 80. We had someone get a job as a trainee phlebotomist. She then refused to go on the phlebotomy course because she's needle phobic. Somehow, she kicked around our unit for a year and a half doing duck all before applying for redeployment into another role that would reasonably expect her to be handling needles. Story 81. Colleague forgot to validate a customer's insurance on a rental car, didn't do any license checks, etc. Just so happened that either this customer was dodgy AF or he realized he could get away with it. As we didn't take license details, but ended up taking the car out of the country and we never saw it again. Customer denied ever having a car from us, ended up just blocking our number. Police were involved and we had to claim the cost of the car back from our insurers. Took ages too because the driver was never fully covered under our policy. My colleague just got a slap on the wrist. Story 82. My boss deleted a week's work for our entire team, so we had to do it all again. No comeback at all. Also, I worked in it for a major UK bank in London, and one of my colleagues used to regularly disappear to the toilet to snort CK. Everyone knew what he was doing, but nothing was ever done about it. Which was a pity, as he was crap at his job even when not high value. Story 83. Let's see. Has a documented history of fraud and misleading sales through their FB. Has been told off multiple times for taking stuff off other people's desks. Reprimand was a verbal stop taking stuff off people's desks. Other colleagues have taken to hiding equipment in the server room / locked desk drawers to avoid nicking stuff. Colleague responsible regularly sits on Tinder, puff during work hours, stopping occasionally to talk to his missus on the phone loudly. Regularly uses RDP to connect to personal PC and download illegal games during work hours. Configure to bypass USB to avoid need to log into his PC. He's an IT admin. His PC unlocked itself. Because he left it plugged in, he wasn't there. Boss who hired him regularly jokes about disappearing stuff being his fault, does nothing about it. Equipment in our disposal pile keeps disappearing whenever he goes to our warehouse. He's been directly told to stop taking the stuff, but it still happens, as claimed via HR. He requires larger monitors to allow him to see the screen better. Currently has 27-inch monitors ×2, upgrading to 32s, somehow also getting a stream deck. He's an IT admin, not a streamer. Has somehow united an otherwise fractious bunch of R-rate it-gits who love to complain about each other. To all agree they dislike him so greatly it impacts their everyday. Story 84. I worked in a place responsible for a major profession where bullying in the office was rife. A woman serially bullied members of her team and wasn't quiet about it either, with a particular team member left in tears, and this was often in front of SMT. SMT gave no ducks and it carried on for years. I was on a different team and got bullied, but kept a log and collected emails showing how I was being treated. Apparently not bullying, but misunderstanding. Luckily, my solicitors had a different view. Bullies got to stay on without repercussion. The doozy was at a local charity I worked for. 2 members of staff helping themselves to funds. One, in fundraising, decided to bag herself a gift voucher, or maybe cash, I can't remember, that had been donated by a shop. Suspicions abound as it should have gone to a raffle winner. Fundraiser suspended whilst issue investigated. HR managed to follow an old policy instead of the new one, so fundraiser reinstated to avoid legal action from her. Rest of the team less than thrilled at having to work with a thief. Worse was a guy in corporate who was related to the founder of the charity. He had no clue how to do his job, but was fully capable of taking a cut from payments for capital work. We had to obtain quotes from companies which included one of his mates. Their company always came in just a smidge under the next quote. Come invoice time, numbers would magically change to be higher. Both me and my manager realized what he was up to, but he had to stick around because he was the founder's son, even though he was a heavy drinker and gambler, and dabbled in substances. Story 85. Guy didn't secure the load in the back of a Luton van. 2 times 600-kilogram flight cases broke through the shutter and tail lift and were left rolling along the M6. He then pulled over and wheeled them back on. Cost around $2,500 to repair the van, no disciplinary, and luckily wasn't contacted by the police for wheeling cases across the lanes of the M6. Story 86. Worked with a bloke who had been in the job for a week at a very famous university and managed to wipe a crap ton of important data. Instead of sacking him, the boss blamed the older man who'd worked there for 35 years, even though he knew whose fault it was. So the old man got the sack whilst the new blood stayed. Story 87. I used to work at a Ford dealership. I was an apprentice mechanic at the time. A woman came in asking to have her light bulb changed. I did it for free, just grabbed a spare bulb and put it in. She then complained I had scratched her car bumper. I couldn't believe it. I didn't drive the car. I just walked out and did it. I put the front side light in, she said. I scratched her rear bumper. I didn't even go there. I did a nice thing for someone, and she just lied. I threw my screwdriver on the floor. It bounced and hit her front bumper, scratching it. We replaced both bumpers. What is the rudest thing you have ever said to a work colleague? Story 1. We had one guy who used to be a delivery driver. When I worked in the warehouse, he used to come up to me every morning for ages and have a chat, whether it be about work, home, family, etc. He was a really friendly guy and we'd chat for ages. Then he was promoted to be a manager of drivers. And at this point, I'd also been promoted into transportation, and he became so rude and angry. Our departments often clash as they need to get deliveries out. We need to have vehicles working. But my department is often challenged with vehicle repairers not sticking to schedule or struggling for parts. Think he was a vehicle short for one of his drivers and came at me screaming in my face in the office and telling me I was useless. So I screamed back, yeah, well, you used to be a decent guy when you were a driver. Now you're a ducking. The office went silent. He went red-faced and left the room. And my colleagues still laugh about it to this day. Story 2. Called my boss and told him to duck off when he questioned one of my managers for being 4 hours late. I was a store manager and just starting my shift, when they had been in hospital all night with a sick child. I told them not even come in till their kid was better, so I was surprised when I heard about it. My boss, area manager, just went full 100 on her, with no empathy for her situation. And I walked in during this happening and lost my temper completely. Overall, no punishment happened to either of us, and my boss fully apologizes to her a few days later. Stand your ground and look out for your people. Story 3. I accidentally forwarded someone some feedback once that I forgot I was only drafting and had not finished writing yet. It described one piece of work they had done for me as unmitigated C. They were all right about it, but I did apologies. It was unmitigated C though. Story 4. Used to work in a pub kitchen. One of the waitresses would ask us, the kitchen staff, where is this going? What else is it going with? Instead of reading the ticket constantly, which pissed all of us off as we didn't really have time to be doing her job as well as ours. I started telling her, read the ticket every time instead of answering her properly, but it never got through to her. In one mid-lunch rush, I snapped, Jenny, are you stupid? Can you ducking read? What does it say on the ducking ticket? I've never heard a pub kitchen go that quiet before or since. I don't think she ever spoke to me again, but I wasn't that sad about it. Story 5. When I worked at one of Gordon Ramsay's restaurants in the middle of a busy dinner service when I was struggling to keep pace, the senior sous chef said to me, you're ducked if you have to do more than one thing at once, aren't you? I bet you can't even piss and crap at the same time. Top-level cuisine, top-level insults. Story 6. Years ago, I told a colleague to shut the duck up and stop twittering like a ducking budgie. In my defiance, I had an incredibly bad headache, and she'd pounced on me the second I appeared at my desk to chase up something that I told her 3 weeks previously needed her input before I could proceed. This I told her in no uncertain terms, and then being extremely unwell, I did the professional thing and burst into tears. Instead of flouncing off to complain, she gave me a hug, told me I was obviously under a lot of pressure and not to worry, if I could turn back time. Story 7. I used to work with 19 blokes and just me as the only lady. One guy would comment on how much makeup I wore, or just told me I looked unkempt. He looked like the guy from the tweets or a caveman. I knew him, and another bloke liked to use escorts. I had got so fed up one day that I asked him how many escorts he had shared with a colleague. It kind of came out like word vomit. He grumbled something at me, but never again did he comment on my appearance. Story 8. I once pulled a fellow exec director out of a meeting and told him if he ever made a junior member of my staff cry again for doing something accepted as normal in our company, putting a diary invite in his schedule, to which anyone else would just have accepted or declined. Without asking him first, I would pursue it as bullying, as there was a pattern as to how he behaved with young women in the workforce, and I would make it my cross to die on if he carried on. I explained that shouting and throwing things were unacceptable, and did so behind a closed door. I was at the end of my tether after 6 months of this. He never did it again, and we worked together-ish for another 5 years. But we never really got on after, then unsurprisingly. Made exec team meetings a bit strained. Story 9. Once told a laborer to put his ducking phone away, or I'll throw him off the roof we were on. He'd been asked, told, had wages docked numerous times to put his phone away. My threat seemed to work. There's other people's safety at risk. Fat-headed little story 10. A female colleague was bending down by my feet to plug something under her desk. I innocently said, while you're down there. Before I could finish, she called me a disgusting pig. What I was meaning was, while you're down there, could you unplug such and such a cable as I need to change the plug? She saw the funny side after, but still haunts me. Story 11. I've told a couple of managers to go duck themselves. Called one I was going through a bad time and dealt with it very poorly. Would handle the situation much better now and not be such in a hole. I didn't even get sacked. Lasted 2 more years. Story 12. Used to work retail with a manager that was ducking useless. He purposely hired younger women because it was a game/tech shop that had a bunch of nerds come in regularly. This one woman was at university and only worked weekends. But every time she was in, she just stood around chatting up one of the other guys, complaining about the job and bragging about what her well-off grandma bought her this week. After what felt like the 10th time of asking her to do her job during Christmas rush, I just lost it. I'd just been getting complaints from customers because of her and said, "Yo, will you do your ducking job? No one gives a crap about your life. And if you want to suck his cock, do it when the rest of us aren't covering for your useless arse." Story 13. Just last week, actually. Line manager at work. About 2 months ago, she was stripped of any management responsibilities, which was actually my doing, because I went to the boss with the receipts of how she behaved, and so she was sidelined and told not to bother any other members of staff. Tip: if you're going to be a E, try not to put evidence of you being in writing on emails or Teams chats. It didn't take much to convince my boss, because everyone in the office, including him, absolutely hates her because of what a horribly arrogant personality she has. Anyway, she's an insane micromanaging witch. So having her oversight and managerial responsibilities removed clearly was hugely humiliating for her and caused enough for her to start job seeking, because 3 weeks ago, she announced she's leaving and plans on emigrating to Australia. Despite the fact that she no longer has any authority outside of her own workload at all, she sent me an email requesting a report by the next morning, a ridiculous request, and demanded I gave her progress updates at lunch and the end of the day. Useless and entirely unreasonable busy work for someone I don't have to take orders from. I told her that I already had work of my own to do, and I'd see what I could to get it to her, ASAP, but that I had to prioritize my own work, so it wouldn't be with her by her deadline. She responded by saying, "That sounds a bit like an excuse to me," the tone making it clear she was inferring I'm lazy and avoiding work. So I just straight up told her that she's a rude, controlling little ducker, and that none of us here can wait for you to piss off. Put up with her for 2 years, and despite her crap tone, was always polite. And just took it, so letting her have some back felt incredibly satisfying and cathartic. Story 14. If I wanted to hear the opinion of an OAP escort, I'd ask you. As I didn't, I'll recommend you do something wild for people like you. Close your legs in your mouth, snapped at a former manager of mine in 2016. Never ever think you've got the right to slag me off just because my disability isn't visible, sweetie. My floor manager thought it was that funny that she had it printed on the side of a company mug for me. Wish I'd taken it with me when I left, huh? Story 15. Last I worked with was just an absolutely toxic Karen. Everything about her oozed toxicity. I was generally polite and professional with her because she wasn't worth getting in the crap over. I was in town on my day off and I saw her. She came up to me and started talking, and I just walked off completely blanking her. To be fair, I had to put up with her at work. Sod that for my day off. Next shift, she comes up to me and asked why I blanked her. Without thinking, I said, "Because I ducking hate you." I was about to cringe and apologies when she started laughing and telling me she loved my sense of humor. Stupid Karen. Story 16. So one time when I was younger, I worked with a guy who had an extremely annoying and loud voice. I told him he sounded like a fox. Shouldn't have said it, but it wasn't far from the truth. Story 17. A guy moved internally into my team on the desk next to mine. He had a reputation for being a bit grumpy. The first time I spoke to him, he didn't acknowledge me at all. I thought that if I let that slide, it would set a precedent. So I quickly decided to say something that I considered a win-win. 1, he could take offense, in which case I don't care, it was rude to ignore me. 2, he'd take it in good humor and it would break the ice. So I asked him, "Are you deaf or just a rude?" He went with option 2, and we ended up getting on reasonably well. Story 18. I'll daily walk around site when my fitters say they can't install things due to previously crap-done work by other trades and mutter, "F me, they are as much use as tits on a fish." The other trades. Common in our industry to slag other trades when they do bad work. Won't find many on site who won't tell them to their face if it makes the next man's work a lot harder to complete. Story 19. I shouted at my manager to duck off and leave me alone multiple times. He was a complete bully. I worked with my then boyfriend, now husband, who was also a supervisor. My manager was too scared to challenge him on anything, so would shut me in the office to berate me for anything my boyfriend had done. He then started bringing in other staff members to witness our meeting. So all that really happened is more staff saw him get shouted at. After the 4th/5th time, he finally gave up. Story 20. A colleague and I were looking for a piece of equipment, and we didn't know what it looked like. I said Albert was using it last. He knows what it is. What does he know? He's from Jamaica. I tore into him. You what? What the duck has that got to do with anything? Turns out I didn't hear his thick Scottish accent properly, and he's in Jamaica at a family funeral, so might reasonably not be expected to know where it is. Story 21. Worked with an absolute useless idiot of a manager once, but I could generally keep my frustrations under wrap. One day he pulled me into the office for something I can't even remember now, and we got in a disagreement. "What is your problem?" he yelled. "This," I said, gesturing back at him. He just walked out and never said anything else about it, but I cringe at how badly I handled that moment. Story 22. In my first job, tender age of 18 in a big manufacturing company, I worked in the production office. The sales department were notoriously C, as the products basically sold themselves. Not only were they C, but this one guy was also obnoxious and condescending. Called me up to complain about a delay in manufacturing of one customer's product, and I'd had enough and told him he was being a bit of cue him being incredibly offended and demanding an apology. But he was 100% acting like a Story 23. I once told a colleague to give up smoking for his New Year's resolution because he stank, and I hated sitting next to him. He didn't quit, but he did spray cologne when he came back from his cigarette breaks after that. Story 24. Today I asked my colleague to help me unload some big delivery work in a small warehouse, and he pretended that he didn't hear me. The truth is that he is the laziest duck ever walked on earth. He never helps anyone. He is always on his phone, hiding behind boxes, pretending that he's busy with something. Anyway, today when he didn't help me, I told him straight in the face, "You're utter waste of oxygen." He didn't dare to insult me back or anything, but I saw that I offended him a lot. Story 25. We used to have a guy working at ours. He was hard work, but due to being with the company for 2 years, they could not just get rid of him. He would happily dish out insults to the younger guys and girls, but would go off the handle if anyone said anything back to him. I had enough one day while he was mid-tirade. I casually turned to him and said, "You are the kind of person who should have been drowned at birth." I was his boss, and I should have known better, but it shut him right up for the rest of the day. Story 26. Christmas drinks, which were promised as a free all-day affair. After one drink, a pint glass appeared, along with the request for $20 each to get the kitty going. I said, "If I'm paying for my drinks, then I'm off to meet my mates who I actually like spending time with." And at that, me and another of the party went off together and met up with our friends and had a great day. Didn't have any effect on others as I ended up working there for 7 years, and that happened after just 2 months. I did reject any and all company invites to anything and anywhere from that point on, though. Story 27. I had been going through some personal crap and had lost a lot of weight, not specifically intentionally. Sales guy who was always bordering on being an idiot, but obviously thought he was hilarious and could say anything to anyone, casually said, "Perhaps we should stop losing weight now." And I just snapped and said, "If we're losing weight, then you've got some catching up to do." At the time, I was pressed and frankly fed up with people's comments, but in retrospect, whilst clumsily worded, he probably was making a comment out of concern. Story 28. I told my boss, head of sales, he was spineless, cowardly once. He'd asked me to do something to get a deal and to help the team hit target. Nothing shady, just a higher discount than we'd usually like. So I did it. When his boss, sales director, questioned me on why I'd sold it at that level, I told him it was because I'd been asked to by the head of sales. Head of sales denied it because he was a spineless, cowardly, and couldn't own it. So I told him what I thought of him and never to expect a favor from me again. Story 29. Years ago, I worked in any office where adult chat was fairly common during breaks. Nothing overly flirty, but more banter and confessions. And it was often the ladies leading the conversation. One day, the female ringleader was moving desks and came into the office carrying a little pot plant. I just looked up and called out, "Nice bush." She just went the color of beetroot before bursting out laughing. Story 30. As a UNI lab technician, I had to prepare the equipment for practical classes. Had my hands, pockets, arms full, and was going bum first through a door when one of the senior lecturers asked, "Could you just take this X upstairs?" Turned to him and, before thinking, said, "Do I look like an octopus to you?" Luckily, he found it funny and actually offered to help carry the stuff. Story 31. Had a girl at work who was a proper nasty crap. Always nice to people's faces, but as soon as they left, would talk about them in a negative way. Anyway, she was quite overweight and was moaning about being overweight, so in a dry tone, I said, "Stop eating so much and move more." Then carried on with my work like nothing had happened. Story 32. After having someone who thought very much of himself from another department nagging at me and going on and on about something that had literally nothing to do with me, I told him to back off. This was after a fair while of patiently explaining that it had nothing to do with me and him ignoring it. He then threatened to go to my boss about what he thought about my attitude, and my response was that I genuinely could not give less of a crap about what he thought of me. He did not go to my boss. Story 33. Not me, but my old boss, who was a really great bloke, pulled one of the lads out of a meeting into the general office area and said, "For duck's sake, Matt, get your ducking act together, because you are looking like a right." Office went silent. I absolutely pissed myself. Still laugh about it now. Story 34. My good friend at work is addicted to buying random little plastic things from like BM to decorate her work desk with. Think like a small fake sunflower in a pot with sunglasses on, etc. They're a bit tacky, but in an ironic way, her desk is just covered in them. Well, anyway, one day I went round to her desk to chat crap for a bit, and she had this plastic pink watering can that was shaped like a flamingo on her desk. We ripped the crap out of each other all the time, so I picked it up and was like ducking. Hell, you don't half buy some tat, do you? Turns out it was the girl who sits next to her that bought it for her as a gift because she was leaving the company and thought of her when she saw it. She snapped back at me like, "Do you mind I bought her that as a leaving present?" I don't know what went through my head, but I immediately just replied like, "Oh, well, you can't deny that. It's tat though, can you?" She didn't take it well. Story 35, not to a work colleague, but back in the day, I used to deliver white goods for a certain catalog as part of a two-man team in 7.5 tones round London. We took turns driving. One day I was the navigator. We took a washing machine into this house. Part of our brief was to take the old one out and install the new one, but we had a hire truck that day and left our tools in the normal one. This particular lady was a sued 6.5 to 7, several tiers above my gunning mug. She wanted an install, which was fine, but we had no tools. She popped off and came back with a selection in her hand. Her first words to me were, "Do you want a screwdriver?" Without thinking, I said, "Well, I'm not the driver, but I'm open to offers." She laughed for about 10 minutes solid, but my driver ruined any chance of a more by using her toilet while I was doing the install. The full 20 minutes in the crapper. Story 36. I once paraphrased a joke. The difference between you and a used car salesman is that the used car salesman knows when he's lying. He had really been getting my goat up for a few weeks with his lies about people in my team. It was not helped by having a mutual boss who was useless and just agreed with everything the last person said to his face and never kept promises. Story 37. I had a coworker who had a habit of butting in when uninvited. I was working on a problem with someone else in his earshot, and he chimed in with a suggestion that we had thought of, tried, and discounted some time previously. I retorted with, "Oh, it's last Thursday," out of frustration. Uncalled for, and I regret it to this day. Story 38. This sadly wasn't me, but I love it. There was a woman working on the same project as me, but in a different department who was horrible, really snide and belittling, but also had zero interest in learning what the project actually was and would regularly kick off if things weren't exactly the same as on her previous, very different project. A few months ago, she left the company to go and work for the prison service. The project manager sent an email to her with everyone on the project in, finishing with the line, "I've always thought prison would be great for you. What strange things do you see work colleagues doing?" Story 1. We have the break room just down from my office. I could smell something slightly burning and struck my head in. A lad, no older than 25, was having a toasted tea cake. Fine, fair enough. Then I saw him sit down. He opened a box, got out some sandwiches, some little cake and some scone. Lad was having an afternoon tea. Story 2. When we all start getting a bit hot and sweaty in summer, one woman pumps a big glob of alcohol hand sanitizer onto a paper towel and scrubs her armpits with it. Not in the loos or anything, she does it right at her desk. My manager has a famously weak stomach, and seeing her do this makes him so much that he has to leave the area until she's gone. Story 3. I used to work in pretty much all male office except for 2 attractive young women. It basically became a competition between them as to who could come into work dressed the most provocatively. It got to a point where they were both coming in looking like strip club waitresses, and the management finally intervened and explained appropriate office attire. The ironic thing was most of the guys were married older dudes who barely noticed. Story 4. We have a guy that spends most of his day just pretending to work. For example, he will take an empty bin from one end of the factory to the other, then 20 minutes later, take it back again. I've also witnessed him empty a rubbish bin one piece of rubbish at a time, instead of just tipping the whole lot into the skip at once. Story 5. 1. Some guy washing his junk in the sink. Not in the toilets, in the communal kitchen. 2. There used to be a guy who would go to the toilet stalls and eat his packed lunch. One time it was like a scene out of a movie. I was in a stall, and there was all this rustling from the one next to me, and then crap. As there was a bump, then an orange rolled under the gap and into my cubicle. I didn't quite know what to do at first, as it took me somewhat by surprise. But then this hand came feeling under the gap back and forth, so I gentled rolled the orange back towards the hand, then heard a little "thank you" as he scooped it away. Story 6. Whenever one of my employees sees any variety of insect or vermin, he has to pick them up and release them again, somewhere close by to us, and talk to them like they're his children in a funny voice, which completely distracts him from the task at hand temporarily. Story 7. Used to work with a guy, and he had an obsession for spearing flies. There was this macabre display of them decorating his weird little cubbyhole office in the warehouse. Strange bloke. Decent warehouse guy, though. Story 8. Worked at a GP surgery. One of the receptionists would bring in toffees, then ask a specific big-built GP to put one in his pocket for a few hours to soften it up before eating it. This was a constant thing. She later left to run a sandwich shop. God knows what practices went on. Story 9. Once caught a guy pleasure himself gherkin in the back of the work van. He thought we had left in the other van to go to another job, but I forgot a specific tool I needed in the back of that one. That's the worst. Some dirty duckers on the building sites. Story 10. Years ago, back in the 1980s, I worked in an office where a guy would go visit a dominatrix in his lunch hour for a good whipping. He'd then show off the welts on his back to us. Story 11. Used to work with somebody and he would pick a word in the morning and count how many times they said it on the radio. He used to have a book full of tallies for the day. The word could be an elaborate adjective or a simple noun. It varied from day to day. Story 12. Had a colleague at my last job that would do this weird throat burp hiccup once a day, every single day. One time when he did it, another colleague asked if he was okay, and colleague one just completely denied it ever happening. For context, I work in engineering, so we don't deal well with social interaction because we're all autistic, so things like the above are very common. Story 13. A woman started working for us as a quality engineer, and in her first week, she brought her lunch to our table and sat down. We all said hello. 2 minutes later, she ate some of her dinner by putting her face in the plate. No hands, just eating like a dog. We all looked at each other speechless. Story 14. There are quite a few people where I work who eat in the toilet. Some hang around in the wash area and eat, whereas others sit on the actual toilet and eat. It's more common than you'd like to believe. Story 15. Had one guy pierce a bag of kippers with a welding rod and dangle them in a water boiler/urn. They inevitably leaked into the boiler and stunk the cabin out for weeks. Story 16. I work with a guy that prints everything out to read. And I mean everything: spreadsheets, emails, documents, etc. I don't go in the office much, but when I do, there's just a sea of paper everywhere because our 2 paper bins are always overflowing. My manager complains to me about it because he's the unbelievable version of David Brent in the real world. I often hum the tune to Stuck in the Middle with You. Story 17. Repeatedly pull bits of skin off and put to their nose. Clearly thought he was in alone one morning, but I'd been in for a bit setting up and could see between the monitors. I've heard of stuff like this with anxious people chewing and biting of tongue and cheeks. Done it myself in bad phases, but never with hands and then smelling it. Story 18. Pretending to have a dog so they could take part in some silly cute pet photos competition on Teams. Then doubled down and carried on the charade after being found to have gleaned the photos from a Yahoo News article. Story 19. I was using mouthwash at work and some creepy person kept staring at me, and I was so scared I swallowed my mouthwash after I'd gurgled. It was a really strange moment since I was in the toilets at the time, and they were peering over the top of the cubicle they were in. Story 20. Once walked into the raw prep room to find the head chef in his 50s, squatting trouserless over one of our marinating bowls full of soapy water, washing his stuff. Off to see a Rozzy, apparently. Don't know if that bothered me more, or that he was listening to Evanescence at full blast, singing along. He wasn't even remotely fazed by me entering. I quit on the spot and reported to immediately. Cameras in the room, so he was ducked. Story 21. I had a colleague who picked his nose lavishly, then smeared it all over his jumper. The front was just a wasteland of dried-on snot. This was a top manager and had a list of academic credentials as long as your arm. But boy, did he like nostril excavation. Story 22 was washing my hands after going to the toilet. The other person in there was doing everything they could to appear like they were washing their hands even though they weren't. It would have been less work for them to actually wash their hands. Some people are weird and disgusting. Story 23. In a past job, cutting their fingernails with the office scissors in a way where the nails would fly all over the room, or pulling out old hair strands and putting them down in a ball on the disk space that everyone uses. Story 24. We were once at the funeral of a company's owner, and out of the blue, his estranged son barged open the front door, exclaimed, "Father," ran across the church, unable to slow down, knocked his late father's coffin over, and started fighting the priest. He became the company's managing director via his father's will. Story 25. Our back room is basically everything. Office, stockroom, break area, the lot. They'll just lie on the floor, and it's so awkward. If you go to get something and someone's just lying flat on their back out there, the carpet's really scabby. It's not a nice plush thing or anything like that either. Story 26. My old boss used to eat kiwis whole, skin and all, eat apples whole, core, seeds, the lot, pick his nose, and eat it in front of anyone without any shame. Honestly, don't think he noticed he was doing it. And furiously rub his ears, which made a loud fapping noise heard across the office. Story 27. Lad I work with sounds like a horse chewing an apple when he eats. Decided not to say anything until recently, when people in a group where talking about eating habits, and the same lad had decided to tell me I eat loud, the cheek of it. So I recorded him next time he was eating and played it back. Gob was smacked. Story 28. One of the people in my building has a habit of announcing very loudly that he needs someone to wipe his bum, usually when I'm on a video call. The building is my home and my colleague is my 3-year-old toddler. Story 29. I was once in a team meeting, around 12 of us in the team, and our manager was planning what work would be done the following week, assigning tasks out, etc. The tone wasn't super serious, but it wasn't like it was a fun meeting either. Most people, including myself, had laptops open, taking notes or doing work. I casually look to the right, and all I see is that on my colleague's screen is just a big picture of hot dogs. Hot dogs! I had to use all my self-restraint to not completely lose it and start uncontrollably laughing in the middle of this meeting. It was just the last thing I expected to see when I looked over, and why hot dogs? Apparently he was deciding on what he wanted for tea that night. Fair play. Story 30. I never witnessed this, but I worked in a call center, and we had to sign a sheet to go to the toilet, and managers would check each hour because somebody kept crapped in the sink. Why? And how? Did they literally squat over the sink? It's a shared toilet, so anybody could have walked in and witnessed the horrifying moment. Or did they first drop a chocolate log in the bowl and then transport it to a secondary bowl, sink? Humans are weird, but especially men. We're ducking animals. Story 31. Wow. This triggered a memory I didn't know I had. Back in the 90s, I used to work in an office, and a lady I worked with would watch herself eat in a mirror. I mean, she would set up a mirror before having her lunch and watch herself eating. It was so strange, but no one else ever mentioned it. Story 32. I worked with a heavyset fellow who complained of IBS and have visible psoriasis. He would openly pick and eat the dry skin from his arm and head. He used to microwave a pack of bacon for breakfast and would eat a stick of bologna for lunch. He also had a liquid crap all over the toilet seat. Such an odd man. Story 33. In my job, we were COVID testing weekly at a minimum for a good long while. Walked in on a colleague who'd forgotten to test last night, so figured she'd just test quickly in the bathroom before work. Okay, not a massive problem. Only she swabbed her nose, then put the booger-covered swab into her mouth to swab her tonsils. Then she looked at me and said, "I hate that bit. It's so disgusting. I wish they'd come up with a better way so you don't need to put nose stuff in your mouth." I told her. She didn't believe me. Insisted the instructions that come with the test specifically say to do your nose first, then mouth. Eventually, she agreed to check the instruction. At that point, I left the room. Neither of us needed that revelation to be a two-person experience. Story 34. Many from one guy in our office. Opened a carton of milk, drank from it, realized it was sour and spat it everywhere, put the lid back on and put it back in the fridge. We had Secret Santa and a food bank collection going on. The day of giving the Secret Santa presents, he gave 3 packets of biscuits to a guy who had just lost a load of weight and openly talked about his weight loss. Biscuits happened to disappear from the food collection. Was a night out in a bar to meet clients. He vomited on the table and wiped it off with his sleeve and sat back down like nothing happened. There's so many more. Story 35. A guy just started at our office and thought a good impression was walking around the building on his phone trying to hatch a Pokemon egg. Same guy challenged himself to eat 7 burgers in one sitting. No one asked him to do it, but he got us all to watch, and he only managed 2 before feeling sick. Made us all laugh, at least. Story 36. I used to work in a call center. I had a colleague who'd book holiday for the middle of his shift for like an hour, then just sit and stare blankly at his screen until the time was up. I thought maybe he had some leftover holiday he needed to use. Apparently not. It's just how he enjoys using his holiday. Which would be fine, but why just sit there at your desk? Go outside, go up to the lunchroom or something. This guy did a lot of other weird stuff too, though. Story 37. Not necessarily see, but hear. Whenever I'm in a toilet cubicle, I always get 2 or 3 other people coming into the toilets at the same time, talking very loudly. Then they start willing and spitting in the sink opposite my cubicle. Not sure what they get up to, but by the time I leave the cubicle, they're gone just like that. Story 38. I mean, preying on young, innocent women was a bit strange of my boss. Thankfully, he fired me because I didn't comply to his weird ways, tossed SCD, his precious M4, not long ago, and got done for doing 111 miles per hour on a country 60 miles per hour road. Story 39. Had a colleague that didn't last very long. They sat on at the desk, less than 5 feet away from me. They would take off their shoes and socks, pick at their feet with a compass until there was flakes all over the floor, then vigorously moisturize their feet. Multiple times a day. Would have to hoover under their desk at the end of the day. Story 40. One of my old colleagues used to bring in 2 slices of bread with them, and then at lunch go to the shop and buy a pack of wafer-thin ham and put the entire pack between the 2 slices every single day. It was incredible stuff, really. A good 20 to 30 ham slices every day. Story 41. At my current job, We have an open plan concept for everyone. So the CEO, when he is in town, sits with all of us. He plays his country music on loud like he's not heard the concept of headphones. I think executives should have their own office personally, because putting it out there, how much little they do is jarring. Story 42. If you're going to talk about dental hygiene, then the weirdest thing I've seen, not at work, but on the school drop-off, whilst in my car in a car park waiting to drop my eldest son off at primary school, he would have been about 5, there was always a woman who would park next to me with her 2 kids. Fair enough, but she would always brush their teeth in the car. Bit odd, but okay. I can only think that she fed the children breakfast as she drove them to school. But the real kicker? To get the toothbrush wet before she put the toothpaste on and did the kids' teeth, she used to put it in her own mouth to get it wet. Story 43. I was in the gents at work, washing my hands at the basin, when a guy came out of one of the stalls with no shirt on. He seemed a bit shocked to see me. It was quite early, so not many of us in. And after doing a double take, explained, "Sorry, I got really hot when I take a crap." Yeah, mate, that's what you were doing. Story 44. When I was a student and working retail, I was warned not to touch the receipt spike, as the not-so-normal colleague on shift before me used it to stir their soup and then proceeded to lick it. Story 45. And worked with a guy who has severe dandruff in his beard. Nothing wrong with that. He couldn't help it. He could help picking it out and eating it in meetings, though. Also, he had pride in a coffee mug that had never been washed. It must have only had half capacity thanks to the buildup of old coffee crust. Story 46. In a busy office cubicle, turn the radio up on the tinniest speakers ever and sing along. We don't all have the same lunch breaks, so many will still be on calls with this in the background. Story 47. I'm only in the office for meetings and the occasional full day, but I've got one colleague, senior level, who picks her feet at her desk, on her desk, and another, more senior, who insists on having a conversation with colleagues while they're in the showers. It doesn't matter who it is or how many people are in the individual cubicles, he will drag out getting ready so he can shout his way through a conversation with us all. The best part is, he doesn't cycle or run into the office. Just feels like having a shower there. Very weird. Story 48. On a hot UK summer, and in an office without AC, the boss got mad that his boss had not provided an AC or fans. He proceeded to take his trousers off and work in his boxers. When he started taking his trousers off, we were kind of worried about what was underneath. Story 49. My colleague used to peel their satsumas like a normal person but then bite into them like an apple, instead of separating them into segments and eating the segments one by one. I'll never forget the day I witnessed that for the first time. Myself and a couple of others asked about it, and the person totally didn't realize it was unusual to eat them like that. I also had a colleague who would eat everyone's leftovers off their plates whenever we went out for a meal, including new people they had just met. Story 50. The guy sat behind me has tea and Belvita bars for a mid-morning snack. Pretty basic. However, his method is truly unique, and I find myself watching in fascination each time. He dunks the biscuit to full length, extends his tongue to his chin, and then places the whole biscuit on his tongue before retracting it and swallowing the biscuit. Story 51. Was at an all-day workshop a while ago with about 9 colleagues. After lunch, sitting around the one big table, the woman next to me gets out one of those floss on a stick things and starts picking bits out from between her teeth and examining them. Turned my stomach. Story 52. Work overtime, weekends going above and beyond for absolutely no reason. It would make no difference doing the minimum in what they're doing. Actually had a colleague meet 2 weeks after the birth of his firstborn asking me about some project we're doing. The project, by the way, is absolutely pointless and of no value to anything, but the higher-ups are very keen on it. Story 53. At the previous agency I ran, we hired a junior dev. He had long hairs, and when thinking about a coding problem, he would put some of his hairs in his mouth, sort of chewing them with his front teeth. He would then pull one hair out and roll it around his tongue, then pull it out with his fingers, fidgeting with the strand. Story 54. Ex-army bloke. He served many tours in Afghan and Iraq. Bit of a weird bloke as it is, but his dinners are renowned for being bloody horrendous. Even the kids tell him how ducking gross it is. He brings in a mess tin with leftovers from last night's tea, caked in mayonnaise. He never eats it all in one day, so instead of emptying it out on a night, he just adds on the next lot of leftovers on top, cakes in mayo, and goes again the next day. In the winter, he's been known to leave it on the radiator in the classroom he's in all morning so that it's warmed up when dinner time comes. Story 55. Used to work with a chap who would put his first 2 fingers up his nostrils, look at them, and then put them in his mouth. It was so unexpected during a conversation. Initially, I convinced myself it wasn't happening until a new starter had the same bemused look, witnessing his mucus. Diet Story 56. Woman I worked with used to bring in a massive family-sized thermos full of hot chocolate, chug the whole thing, and lie under the desk reading a book at lunch. She was also that one person who had a fully stocked pharmacy on their desk and supplied paracetamol, etc. to the rest of the office. Story 57. I've seen someone empty about 6 or 7 sachets of vinegar in a cup, along with 2 sachets of salt and pepper. He then tops it up with hot water and drinks it. Story 58. A guy I work with really liked Shania Twain and basically has her songs playing in his headphones all day. In a dead quiet office, it is so startling to hear him every now and then sing the same intro bars to Man, I Feel Like a Woman every single time. Duh, let's go girls. Story 59. A guy used to spend about 40% of his day just abusing his wife on the phone. One time he walked into the toilet, began taking an enormous crap, then pulled out his phone to abuse her some more, while still taking his crap. Someone told me she was extremely rich, and he was basically a gold digger. Greasy Ducker also microwaved kippers in the office, which is practically a war crime. Have you ever found out what your colleagues really think of you, and did it surprise you? Story 1. I overheard 2 ward managers roundly slating the entire senior management/heads of department team whilst waiting around the corner to go into the same meeting as them. One of them said, after a while, "All right though." A better appraisal than any formal one I ever had. Story 2. I accidentally overheard somebody I thought I got along with fine begging my manager to let her work with somebody else. In a different job, I had somebody be surprised to learn I was someone who partied way too hard and said, "I thought you were some quiet girl." Completely baffled me. Story 3. My colleagues just put on a surprise picnic lunch during our all-day meeting for my 40th birthday. They must have easily forked out 100 pounds between them, plus another 60 pounds in gift vouchers. I was lost for words. Story 4. A guy was fired from his job and put in a DSAR request to the employer. He got back screeds of info which showed his coworkers hated him and had been slagging him off. He was devastated to find it out. Sometimes it's just best not to know. Story 5. I'm currently on a grad scheme at my first rotation. A lot of deadlines coming up. Was on a team call the other day and we were discussing outstanding tasks and division of labor. One of the managers was like, "What's that grad doing? Is he busy? Make sure we get as much use out of him as we can." She didn't realize I was on the call. Nothing serious, but I felt like a piece of meat. The mad thing is, I've met her in person a few times and she seemed really chill, but her tone of voice when she didn't realize I was on the call was very different. Luckily, she's not my actual line manager, and the colleague I'm shadowing clarified that I've been helping them out a lot. Story 6. I was interviewing people with a woman in my wider team who I have some meetings with but don't work with directly. We interviewed someone and afterwards she said the candidate was amazing. I made a joke along the lines of how the candidate was really together, came across really well, and I wanted to be like her when I grow up. The woman I work with told me I am like that, and then went on to say how I always come across so well. And when I speak up in meetings, everyone listens because they know it's going to be worthwhile. I think it's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Story 7. We receive formal, anonymized personal feedback from every colleague every year. Bit brutal, but at least you're under no false illusions that everyone likes you. Story 8. I am not convinced that my colleagues have a capacity for thinking. Plus, I guess I'm not that important, so someone will spend time thinking about me. Story 9. I don't know. My manager says my colleagues love me, miss me when I'm off, think I'm intelligent and helpful, but I feel like I'm not actually well-liked. It might be my low self-esteem and tendency to be negative, but they cut me out of their casual conversation but continue together, or they'll make quips at me so I end up feeling excluded and like I'm annoying people. It's why I prefer just rather than office. I feel left out most of the time. Story 10. I went off sick earlier this year to have a fairly major surgery after being unwell for quite a while. The reaction of my colleagues was pretty unanimously, "What? I didn't realize you were ill. You're always such a cheerful person." I honestly thought I was a miserable sod who never shut up about my health, but I guess not. Story 11. I've been told by colleagues over the years that I'm always collected, always sound knowledgeable, and like I know what I'm doing. It surprises me every time, and I can only think that I am the best actor in the world to consistently cover the anxiety and panic that is always bubbling just under the surface. Story 12. We did one of those team building tasks where you have to write 3 words that describe you and put them in a box. The manager then took a slip of paper out of the box and read it, and you all guess who wrote the words. In my head, I'm an anxious, pessimistic Karen with a dark sense of humor. That's not what I wrote, but something along those lines. Yet every time a slip of paper with the word happy or funny came up, everyone thought it was me. Clearly, the illusion is working. Story 13. My teacher in my primary school seriously thought I was a bully and actually got my mom in, though it was the opposite. I was being bullied and I was just standing up for myself. My mom told me she stood up for me and got very upset with the teacher over this. I'm 28 now, and my mom only told me this a couple of years ago. I genuinely had no idea that one of my teachers thought I was a bully until my mom told me. Me being a bully is like the complete opposite. In primary school, I was the bully's target. So odd. Story 14. Not work, but In sixth form, we had a row of computers on the sidewall, and everyone was sat on them talking crap as usual. At some point, my name comes up and this girl says, "Ugh, I hate, he's such a fat git." So 2 computers down, I lean back and I'm like, oh, okay. Still the most traumatic/funniest day of my life. Good times. Story 15. The way everyone in our office gets slagged off the second they are out the room. I can only imagine what they say about me. I can't say it bothers me too much. They'll probably call me quiet and lazy, which would be the truth. Story 16. I have had several unsettled years of not staying in jobs for more than 6 months or a year. I always think I'm really unpopular until I hand my notice in, and then suddenly everyone tells me how appreciated I am and how much they'll miss me. I always think, you should have told me this months ago. I might have stayed. I'm in the right job now. Here till I retire. Story 17. I found out today that some people think I'm too friendly and it makes them uncomfortable. All my family are friendly and outgoing, so I'm a bit bummed and flat about it. Being friendly is a big part of me. I honestly don't know how to solve this one. I like where I work and I'd hate to feel they don't keep me because I'm me. Story 18. I recently learned that the grads call the engineer team of the bit I work in as Team Electric Bell. I'm not officially leading it, but pretty much. Apparently all the grads want placements on Team Electric Bell. I feel it's positive. Story 19. Yes and no, it didn't surprise me. I'm a cantankerous old curmudgeon who doesn't suffer fools gladly. So it was no surprise that my work colleagues thought exactly the same. My only surprise was how long it took before one of them told me. Story 20. I walked into a classroom where a member of staff and a sixth form student were talking about me. They were facing away from the door so they didn't see me. They were saying I was really passionate and enthusiastic, and you know a good one when you see them. I was newly qualified and doing a 6-week placement on supply, struggling to cope with wild, demotivated kids, COVID era, not enough desks in a classroom. It really moved me. I reckon my colleagues at this college think I'm an annoying Story 21. We all did a personality quiz about each other a few years ago, and under the list of personality attributes, I was given things like wise, assertive, decisive, organized, etc. It made me sound like Jean-Luc Picard. I feel more like the Beverly Hills Ninja, Story 22. When I left my last job, I genuinely thought I had got on well with everyone I had been working with. My boss presented me with a leaving gift that was very obviously just from him. I felt confused a bit as I had donated to other colleagues leaving gifts, and yet it was fairly clear there had been no whip round for mine. I still don't quite understand why no one seemed to care that I had left, and none of my previous colleagues from that job ever even replied to my messaging them with a Happy New Year, less than 3 months after I'd left. Story 23. Years ago, we had an appraisal form at a company where I worked, where one question we had to fill in related to how others saw us at our jobs. I remember not filling anything really useful here. My manager asked why I had not written much, and I said, I don't know what others are saying about me. He laughed and told me what others thought of me, and I was quite pleased with the answer. Story 24. Over time, I found out that my colleagues thought I was vegetarian and also that I didn't eat very much and wasn't a foodie. This is incredibly weird to me because I'm not a vegetarian and I love cooking and exploring new cuisines. However, I don't enjoy eating around people I don't know well, or at business lunches. And I also hate ordering expensive meals when I'm not paying for it. And so mostly if I meet my boss or have meetings, it'll be over lunch due to the industry I'm in. And therefore I normally order something small, light, and cheap, which is usually veggie. I really didn't think about the impression it was giving off. And I know some people will say that if your company is paying, you should order whatever and not worry about the price. But I genuinely cannot enjoy eating food when I'm working, and I think it would look awful to order a big steak or something extravagant, and then just pick at it. Story 25. One time, 2 women in my team, middle-aged, I was in my early 20s, accidentally started talking in the team's group chat about me rather than directly to each other. They spoke about how I was lazy and was avoiding the harder work we had. This was during lockdown, when our company wouldn't furlough, and I had my 2-year-old at home with me. Manager did nothing. Story 26. Once was in my manager's office. He was on speakerphone with another manager who proceeded to say, "Don't give the task to me. They constantly duck things up." My boss was a squid. Wouldn't stick up for me. When I got back to my office, I called the other manager, told her that I heard what she said and asked if she can explain. I told her that my own work was faultless, and I expect a written apology 60 a year. It came a few days later. Story 27. I had some time off for mental health reasons, and my boss was really kind and accommodating. Went back into the office full-time after a few months of working from home and going in occasionally. Later that year, it was time for annual reviews. I accidentally opened the document that he'd filled out rather than the blank one for me to complete. The whole thing was about how detrimental I was to the workplace and how much of a problem I was and could they get rid of me. Completely changed my perception of a person that was a friend as well as a boss and someone who had, to my face, been so supportive. Story 28, I overheard one of my team saying, Angel can sing really well when she wants to. We do all enjoy a little sing-along to the radio as we work, so it was nice to hear that it's not unwelcome when I try. Story 29. I thought I was competent, knowledgeable, helpful, and personable. Turns out I was undiagnosed autistic, and people actually thought I was a busybody job's worth because when I was too focused on the rules. One guy absolutely hated my guts to the point of complaining our manager for answering too many questions. I spent the last couple of months I worked there banned from joining conversations, proper speak only when spoken to rules. I've learned to keep to myself now. Story 30. My coworker H said she had no heat in her car. I had a bunch of hand warmers I wasn't using, the single-use ones, so I brought some in and offered them to her. She said no thanks, and I thought that was the end of it. My other coworker A then came to me and told me she had messaged her saying that "We Dokju offered me some hand warmers. Eek, I would run a mile." I was confused, as I wasn't interested in her like that. And I knew she was in a relationship, so I'm not sure why she thought this was some kind of pickup attempt. I was kind of glad she wasn't interested, but it was fascinating to see how she described me. Story 31. Someone said I was loud and annoying at dinner once. It was a work dinner and drinks were free. However, this person in particular can be quite miserable, and we are similar ages. Story 32. I had to issue out a document asking for people's opinions of me when doing emotional intelligence. As you'd expect, it was really difficult to hear what people think of you. They had the option to add their name or leave it out if they wanted, which made people feel they could be honest. But I found it really helped to understand myself. Story 33. In a previous job, I celebrated a milestone birthday. I didn't expect much from the standard collection we used to do, which used to raise about 50 pounds, but was absolutely blown away with a couple of 100 quid and tickets to an event I was desperate to attend. I then went on maternity and again wasn't expecting much, but was given enough presents/flowers/essentials that I filled the car and then opened my card to find it stuffed with a substantial amount of cash. I just hadn't realized just how well liked I was, and I cried on both occasions when the realization hit. Story 34. Pretty much everyone who has had a child gets a little card and a little gift from the company. When my first child came along, I received nothing. I'm not sure if this was an oversight, but given the previous pregnancy, I lost a baby, which I was open about due to needing time off to help my wife and have a bit of grieving time myself. I admit that I felt a little upset to not have my important life moment recognized as others had theirs recognized. But the other side is, why expect anything? It's just work. I generally tend to assume I'm not well liked or thought of even by those who I do feel I get along with. You don't know what people's opinions are of you once your back is turned. Story 35. A peer accidentally emailed me a complaint that he meant to send to just his manager. He basically didn't hold me in high regard and thought he was a better engineer. Story 36. I didn't think they reckoned much of me, but this week has proven otherwise. I've had a relative in the ICU for over a week now, and I haven't been my normal self at work. I was expecting them to give me a hard time because they had to pick up a bit extra whilst I was leaving early, etc., to visit my relative. Except it's been completely different. Lots of messages and calls to check on me. They've told me they've missed me in the office and my usual team silliness. My manager has been incredibly understanding as well. It made me feel super appreciated and helped to make a pretty awful week a little less awful. Story 37. Got pulled by LM for moving the Christmas-themed projector to be in a better position, so people wouldn't have to try and avoid wires the other day, because I'm ignoring the team consensus apparently, so there's that. Story 38. I overheard my manager saying that he is sick of my attitude, and partially he was right. I was not in the right place mentally, but I was still an overperformer. I submitted a transfer request to another branch. 2 weeks later, I was moved. Once that branch closed down, he called me to come back to his branch, but I took redundancy instead. Story 39. Feedback from one workplace. Everyone likes you. But there was one person who got in trouble for gossiping about me, who hated me, and I had no idea, but was always nice to her. Turns out she thought I was on a date with someone she didn't think I should be dating. Another workplace? I was convinced no one liked me. 3 of us left on the same day. The other 2 were medium popularity. They got cards and a nice bottle of wine. I got so many gifts, and they just gave me the rest of my leaving collection as cash, which was a bag of 120 pounds in random coins, so I was sorted for car parking for a while. Story 40. I recently quit my job as it was just too much for me. I didn't go out of my way to be sociable, as my workload was insane, but I was always there for people when needed. I've started a new role in the same industry, recently attended a trade show. The majority of my contacts mentioned that my previous colleagues said how loved I was, and it was such a shame that I left. Don't know how true it is, but it was nice to hear. Story 41. My bosses like me, or at least the work that I do, but I'm not so sure about my colleagues. One thing I am sure of is that if I left today, they would miss me for about 5 minutes. Max, and then pretty much forget I existed. Story 42. I've overheard myself being called so cute and a lady of good intentions, neither of which I liked or expected as an older person trying to be taken seriously in the workplace. Story 43. I left my last job after 7 years, had been at the company 11 years, worked in a team of 10, didn't have a leaving due, or even get a card or gift on departure, had 4 separate managers, and only one of them acknowledged me leaving. On balance, I had been off a few months with work-related stress, go figure, so resigned as soon as I found another job. So yeah, it didn't need any words, but their actions kind of showed what they thought of me.